Hi, this is installment 5 of what my friends and relatives would call my insanity, and what I call my spiritual awakening. When I get back to Vermont to write my autobiography in '79, I had a few visits from Jehovah's Witnesses. Even though I was at the end of a dirt road, off of a dirt road, they managed to find the place. And the first time they came, I spoke with them in the house, and we talked for, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes or so, maybe even an hour. And I told them I was working on a book, and it was about truth and honesty and dishonesty and competence and incompetence. And they were very interested in it. There was a man and a woman that came to the house. Then one day I was out by the pond, and I had a feeling that the Jehovah's Witnesses were on their way. And about 15 minutes later, they wound up being there. And we talked, and I looked at their Bible, and I saw that their New World Translation that they had with them back in '79, that Revelation started on page 1322, and I knew that Revelation had something to do with the end days, and from everything I'd heard about Revelation. And when I saw the 13 and 22 for the start page of that chapter, I thought, well, that's the Bible I have to have, because 13 was my brother's lucky number, and 22 was my unlucky number at the time. And of course, once I discovered it was Jesus, it was no longer unlucky. So when I say at the time of when they came, no, it wasn't my unlucky number anymore, but it had been most of my life. Like I say, earlier in '79, I had discovered that Jesus added up to 11, and 2 times Jesus was 22. So I no longer considered it unlucky. So the fact that the 1322 was the page that started on was very significant to me. And they didn't have an extra Bible with them, so they said next time they come, they'd bring one, and I could get their Bible. That brings us to Halloween of '79. Now, in Halloween night, 1979, I was sitting in the kitchen, and I had a Gideon Bible that my brother had picked up at a motel before he was on the road, and he had left me a Gideon Bible. And so I was looking at Revelation in the Gideon Bible, and I was actually translating the last chapter. I opened at random, and it was the last chapter of Revelation that I'd opened to. And I was doing a little translation of it. It was fairly easy to translate the last chapter of Revelation. It's nothing real complicated about that. It's not like the 7 seals or anything like that. We're talking about just straightforward stuff in the last chapter. Well, anyway, I'm writing down my translation of it, and I looked up at a sign on the wall. My brother had a gift that had been given to him and his wife, that some neighbors made of a wooden sign with our name on it, and the name, the last name of Hennessy. And I had recently found out from, I guess it was from Jehovah's Witness literature, that Hebrew was read right to left. The direction of Hebrew was the opposite way of the direction of English, that they would read right to left. And I'd also discovered the Hebrew Tetragrammaton, a 4-letter designation for God. I got that information from the Jehovah's Witnesses, that YHWH, Yahweh, or Yahweh, stood for God. It was called the Hebrew Tetragrammaton, a 4-letter designation for God. And I'm looking at that sign, and I decided, to read it right to left. And I had also read a book that someone had recommended about Edgar Cayce, a couple of books about Cayce, and one was Edgar Cayce Speaks on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and another was Venture Inward by Ulin Cayce. And I had discovered that he would go into trances sometimes, and besides just his healing things that he would come up with in trances. Even though he wasn't a doctor, he healed a lot of people with by going into trances and telling them the correct, correct remedy for what was ailing them. Well, he also would go into trances and discuss Jesus, the time of Jesus. And he believed in his trances, he came out with a thing that said, while he was in the trance, that Jesus was born into the Hebrew religious sect known as the Essenes, because they were supposedly the most holy of the people on the planet at the time. And so I'm looking up at that word, Hennessy, and I'm suddenly reading it backwards, and I'll show you what I thought. See this? Hennessy, backwards, is Yesena. There's a Y and an H enclosing a two-end Essene, E-S-S-E-N-N-E. Now, Essene only has one N, but that extra N I had read in a book about the Dead Sea Scrolls, Dead Sea Scriptures and Christian Faith by William Lasser or something like that. There was a cryptic reference in the Manual of Discipline, a little footnote in that book that referred to N as the universal soul, and the Hebrew letter N, which was none, and added up to 50 in Hebrew numbers, that was a cryptic reference to the universal soul. And as far as in Arab, in the Arabic language, they or whatever the Arabs use, Arabic, I guess. And even though N in none is the Hebrew letter of 50, also there was the Arabs had this designation for a universal soul, for the letter N. So you see a two-end Essene, one end, extra N being the universal soul, inside of an abbreviation of the Hebrew Tetragrammaton, the abbreviation of God. And when I saw that, well, I started to believe again that I was Jesus. That I had the name, that Casey thought Jesus was an Essene, and here I have an Essene in my name, I've got that universal soul in my name, and I've got the abbreviation for God enclosing it all. So naturally I thought that I was Jesus, once again. And I believed that all the way up until Thanksgiving of the next year, Thanksgiving of 80. But I don't want to get ahead of myself here. The Jehovah's Witnesses came back a third time, and that's when I got their Bible. And then I finished the book in February of 1980 and decided to go see Robert Gist, because he had told me, remember I'd mentioned this before, he told me way back in '72 that if I ever wrote my autobiography, he'd like to look at it. So I was trying to find Robert Gist at the time, and I never did make connection with him. So after a few months, I actually read the Bible while I was in California. I read that Jehovah Bible, and when I got to Isaiah 53, I thought, wow, I've just written about that guy, the guy in Isaiah 53, and it really starts in Isaiah 52, 14, and 15, where they talk about somebody that is marred way beyond, that is disfigured and looks so much different than he used to, and that he shows people things, says things that people have to actually consider, something new that they've never heard before. And that one of the key lines is in 53:3. It said, "He hid, as it were, his face from us." Now, if it had been the other way around, like in the Gideon Bible and all the other Bibles that I'd seen, we hid, as it were, our faces from him, that wouldn't have made sense to me. But when I saw it, it was the Jehovah Bible, which was the alternate reading of because there's an alternate reading of some key words that they're not sure of the translation of certain words, and one of those words is in that 53:3 that makes it read as an alternate reading. He hid, as it were, his face from us. And I felt that that was the story of my life. I'd just written about somebody that hid his face from everybody, and that the purpose of the biography was to finally reveal what had been hidden. And so that was my first exposure to actually reading the whole Bible, and also that part about Isaiah 53 in the Old Testament. When I got there, how I felt. Now, I returned to Vermont in, these are some notes I have. I don't want to leave anything out from what I did on the segment 5 when I did it at Jug Butts. I have an audio transcription of it, but I don't have it on video, and so that's why I'm redoing it. But I wrote down the key, everything that I talked about as far as the subjects go. I didn't write it word for word, just the subjects. Anyway, I returned to Vermont, and in late April, early May, it was late April of 1980, and there were still strange things going on, and finally on June 25th of 80, my brother had been noticing all the strangeness, and he went out and was sitting by the pond, and then I went out to greet him, to talk to him, and he got up and we met in the garden, and then went back to the pond, and we had a discussion about God and about the coincidences and stuff that was going on, and finally he was like, I guess he didn't believe that I believed what I believed, and that I had to show that I really believed what I believed. That there was that God was a thinking being. At the time, I was believing that this whole thing was being orchestrated by God, and the bottom line was that I said, if you have a better explanation as to what's going on, then you go with that. But myself, I could walk into that pond again, and I'd have to live all over again. I'd have to go through another life to get to the point where I'm at now. But I wouldn't die. I would be brought back. I'd be reincarnated. Well, he said, go ahead. Neither one of us knew how to swim, so I walked into the pond, and you remember his name is John, and this was John's pond, or Jackie we called him, but John was his name that he was born with, John Clark Hennessy. And so I walked into John's pond, and I walked in over my head, and I'd had some swimming lessons in high school, but all I could do was learn how to go the length of the pool holding my breath. And then I had a few lessons from Robin earlier in the summer out there, but I still hadn't learned much about swimming, so I was starting to drown. And he yelled out at me as I was underwater, as I was going down, don't try to lay all your guilt on the rest of the world. And he stormed off into the house and got Robin, and she came out and pulled me out of the pond. Because I'd say he didn't know how to swim, I didn't know how to swim. And she pulled me out. And then he was really pissed off, and he was going to take me to the cops. And instead, he pulled into the next door neighbor's yard and wanted to talk to them about what to do with me. And he didn't know it at the time, but they were in the middle of a big marital fight. And he wound up being cooled off by having the woman, the wife, take him for, go out for a drive to calm him down. And Tom, the husband, took me and said, where do you want to go? And I said, well, about the only place I could think of was these born-again Christians that I knew. So Keith and Sil, Dawson. So we went over to where they were living. They were living in a barn on Keith's parents' house and their farm. And that night, June 25th, 1980, I actually spent in the hay, sleeping in the hay loft. So it's almost like being in a manger on the exactly 6 days the opposite of Christmas, June 25th instead of December 25th. Thought that was interesting. But they didn't have room for me to stay more than just one day, and so they suggested I make up by going and apologizing. And my brother thought it was a suicide attempt, and of course it wasn't. And at least that's what he claimed. I don't know if he thought that, but he claimed that I was trying to kill myself by walking into the pond, and made Robin and Maureen believe that. And it was no suicide attempt. I mean, I'd written about suicide. That was definitely not a suicide attempt. That was an attempt to show that I really believed in God at the time, and that God was orchestrating this, and that God was a thinking entity. now my views of God are a little bit more alien-oriented. But I apologized, and then a few days later they were taking a trip out to California, and it was my job to watch the garden and take care of the garden and watch dogs. And it rained a lot while they were gone, but they were gone most of July. And I was in a play also, a Thurber Carnival. I played about 9 different characters in that. Well, Walter Mitty is 4 characters. That was the lead in one part. And then there was 5 other skits that I was a character in. So I had 9 characters that I was playing. And it did very well. And I was the first one to learn my lines. And anyway, I didn't do a good job of taking care of the garden. And when they got back, some of the peas had not been properly handled, and I guess she lost a lot of the peas, and Maureen did, and she didn't really want me to stay there anymore, and so I had to leave, and I stayed at the Tom and Bev's house next door for a couple of weeks, where I stayed in a tent behind their house, and they had electricity wired into the tent. And during those 2 weeks, I wrote my second manuscript called We've Been Double-Crossed. 2 rights make a wrong, and 2 wrongs make a right. Wisdom from a Madman and His Comic Book. And it was just basically a continuation of things that were going on, and some explanations of symbolism and stuff, and my weird beliefs. And after about 2 weeks, I had enough money to get an apartment in town for 1 month. So I lived in town for a month, and I wrote my next manuscript. I spilled wine on this, which after about 18 pages, I spilled wine on the document, and so that's when I gave it the title, because I hadn't had a title at that time, and I called it I Spilled Wine on This. And again, it was just a continuation of, almost not exactly a diary, but a continuation of the stuff that was going on in my life. And while I was with Tom and Bev, before I went to that apartment, they suggested that I go see a psychiatrist in, I think it was Enosburg Falls. It was either St. Albans or Enosburg Falls. And I went and saw a psychiatrist, and I think I even took a test, the MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasal Personality Inventory or something. And on my way out of the office, I think, it was either the way out of the office or the way into the office, I was crossing the street and this car was coming, and it had a personalized license plate that said, One Lord. And, I took that as a good sign, because I thought I was it at the time. I thought it was One Lord thing. It wasn't exactly, it wasn't what I believe now, but at the time I believed that it was the one Lord, and that I was thinking in the terms of possibly a graduation process, but hadn't completely formulated the theory. That was just at the beginnings of a theory in that direction. But the one Lord's, because I thought I was going there to see a psychiatrist because I believed I was Jesus, and you see this license plate that says One Lord, as the personalized plate. Well, anyway, after the month, I decided to go to California via the northern route, very much northern. I was going to stop at Minneapolis because I knew that Bob Dylan's brother operated the Orpheum Theater at the time, Orpheum Theater in Minneapolis, and I had to get information to Bob Dylan about what was going on. And so I had a little summary of the things that I'd written, and in a notebook that I wanted to get to him, and I figured I could call his brother and leave it with him. Well, when I got to the hotel, I called, and he wasn't in right away, but he returned my call. And I guess he returned the call because I might have said I was with California Record Distributors, or formerly of California Record Distributors, and I'm pretty sure I said formerly of California Record Distributors, because I know I wouldn't have lied about it. And so he returned the call, and we get to talking, and I told him that I believed I was Jesus, and I had to get something to Bob Dylan, some information, and he said, "Oh, you're the seventh one this year." And, and it's funny too, because while we were having this conversation, in the background on the radio station was playing "Jesus Is Just All Right With Me" by the Doobie Brothers. I thought that was an interesting coincidental event. And at any rate, he said drop it off, and he'd have his secretary pick it up at his theater. So the next day I went to the theater and dropped off the manuscript to his secretary. And I never heard anything after that from him, so I don't know what happened, regarding that. Then I made it to California, and I was in San Francisco. I spent one day at a friend's house, or acquaintance house in San Francisco, or outside of Frisco. Then I also spent one day in a motel, and that one day in a motel was the first time I ever saw Gene Scott, Dr. Gene Scott. And he was very interesting. I liked his show because he was more like a teacher than a preacher. And he talked about a lot of things that other people didn't talk about, when it came to theology. He would talk about the pyramid and stuff like that. And he had a guest on from was it Jehovah's Witnesses, or I think it was from the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were talking about mental institutions and how bad some of the mental institutions are, and how dangerous the drugs are that they use on people. And the timing of that was very, very interesting to me, because of believing what I believed, and knowing that there was a good chance I could wind up in one of those institutions. So that was interesting. Then I spent a little time at a friend's house, or like I say, an acquaintance's house in Torrance, and then I went out to my parents' house just around Thanksgiving, during November, December, January of November and December of 1980, and January of '81. Well, on Thanksgiving morning, I woke up from a dream, and the dream changed my beliefs as to who I was. The dream was a football dream, where I caught the ball on the goal line and ran it back all the way to the opponent's 5-yard line, and that's where I was tackled. And I didn't make it all the way, but I didn't have to. I didn't have to score the touchdown. Someone else would take it in for me. And I took that as meaning that I wasn't Jesus, but I was the Holy Ghost who'd come in the name of Jesus Christ, because I'd been doing some reading and stuff in John and about the Helper and stuff like that. And so that was my new belief, that I was the Holy Ghost who'd come in the name of Jesus Christ. And that was a ghost of what I used to be. But because I used to be Jesus, I was now the Holy Ghost, because I wasn't what I used to be. I was a ghost of what I used to be. So that's what I believed for a very, very long time. And since then, I've refined that quite a bit into something else, that will be explained on the segment 9. Now, I made some discoveries while I was there in December I was at my parents' at the library in Victorville, and it was the Book of Days by W. and R. Charles and Lives of the Saints by Herbert Thurston and David Atwater. It was there that I discovered that July 22nd, the 22nd day of the 7th month, the date of the seed movement, midnight, the beginning of July 22nd in 78. Well, July 22nd, I found out was Mary Magdalene Day. I found this out near Christmas, just before Christmas, in 1980. And the seed movement happened in 78. This was over 2 years, almost 2.5 years after the seed movement. I found out that July 22nd, the date of the seed movement, was Mary Magdalene Day. And this was after I had already started believing I was Jesus. This was additional ammunition to support my case. Then I also found out that May 25th, the first day I thought I was Jesus, was Three Marys Day, for Mary Magdalene, Mary Salome, and Mother Mary. And that July 23rd, the day after the seed movement, the beginning of a new biblical generation for me, because I was exactly 33 and a third after that 22nd. I mean, the beginning of the 22nd was the beginning of my last day of being 33 and a third years old. And I had read in some, I think it was Jehovah's literature, that 33 and a third was a biblical generation. I haven't been able to find that anywhere, as far as saying that anymore. I tried to do it online, I couldn't find that. But back then I had read something about it, and I don't know where, I think it was in Jehovah's literature, that 33 and a third represented a biblical generation. And maybe it wasn't Jehovah's Witness literature, but I thought it was. I did look in the dictionary, that big Webster's Unabridged New World International Dictionary, 2nd edition, that my parents had in the desert. They had a 59 version, and I had a 1940 version in the early 80s. Anyway, in that dictionary, it said what about generation? Generation. It says, third definition of generation. A generation is usually taken to be about 33 years. About 33 years. Another definition, in theology, quote, the term sometimes used to explain, 1, the relation between the first and second person in the Trinity, persons in the Trinity, the first being said to generate the second, and 2, the relation between God and man, God being said to generate each soul coming into the world. End of quote. Now, that means that one generation, my first biblical generation, or my first generation, was coming to, again, also the idea of a Trinity. 1/3 of the Trinity would be 33 and a third years. 33 and a third, 1/3 of the Trinity, 33 and a third percent. So that's another possibility of someone coming up with the reason of 33 and a third being a biblical generation. The end of a biblical generation for me was beginning when the seeds moved on the 22nd day of July in 78. I was born on March 23rd, 1945. So the 23rd of March in 45 to the 22nd of July in 78 is exactly 33 and a third years. So on the 22nd, it was Mary Magdalene Day. I was ending a biblical generation on Mary Magdalene Day. And, Mary Magdalene was present at the crucifixion, the end of the biblical generation for Jesus, end of his time on earth there, at least before, the resurrection. And the new generation was starting on July 23rd of 78. And July 23rd is one of three wise men day. They have one at the end of January, and there's one on July 23rd. It's three wise men day. And the three wise men associated with the birth of Jesus, and this was the birth of a new biblical generation for me. After the seed movement, the day after the seed movement. So you got three wise men associated with the birth of Jesus, and associated with my birth, my spiritual birth from the seed movement. And you got the end of a biblical generation in my life with Mary Magdalene Day, who was present at the end of Jesus's 33 and a third years, the death of Jesus, the end of his biblical generation. Now, as far as 33 and a third years goes, I don't want to jump ahead, but I mentioned it, but I will point it out later on how scientists believe that he actually did die on the April 3rd of the year 33, which would be 33 and a third years. Now, I saw two psychiatrists while I was in Victorville, because I was getting really frustrated at friends and relatives, or so-called friends and relatives, not believing, not helping, just basically thinking I was crazy and not really being of any help. And I was deciding then that I was going to show that I was really committed to this by trying to commit myself to a mental institution. Of course, that wasn't really the right thing to do, but I took it because I'm big on symbolism. I thought it would be a symbolic thing to do, even though it would be an actual thing to do, that the symbolism would be there. And so I was going to commit myself to a mental institution. And I saw a couple of psychiatrists in Victorville, a Dr. Hart and a Dr. Beck. And Dr. Beck told my mother that I was paranoid schizophrenic. Now, I'm going to read what I wrote back at that time, just before. I wrote this on December 17th, 1980, just about a month before I was going to actually try to commit myself. And it was in an essay called Yasina's Insanity, in my manuscript titled 5, 9, 15, 55, 99, 13, 22 Pike Essaic Essays. That's this thing. And that's a drawing of a belt buckle that was given to me back when I was in the record business before all this strangeness. It's the rainbow. And I didn't know at the time that the rainbow was the sign of the covenant in Genesis 9:13, the covenant to Abraham and about life forever. And I was wearing this belt buckle all this time, not even realizing that. Okay, here's what I wrote back then. This is the last paragraph on page 33 of Yasina's Insanity. I wonder what it will be like when they take away my personality with their drugs and knives. Looking at the bright side, I would probably be able to enjoy TV again. At least that condition will be only for a little while. I'm sure that God will not have me suffer too much longer. Before I leave and after I'm a vegetable, the thing that I will miss most is crying. I enjoy being moved. I don't like being hurt, but I do enjoy beautiful moments that sometimes lead to good tears as opposed to bad ones. Bad tears are those of self-pity and grief. Grief is even a form of self-pity. We're sad because of our loss rather than being happy for the gain of the departed. I would like people to rejoice when I die, because this time it will be the last time. Good tears are those that lift the spirit when you see acts of nobility accomplished, or at least witness the striving for those acts. If anyone is to cry for me, I certainly hope they will cry good tears. Bad tears tear apart, while good tears restore the heart. Thank you.
The birds are singing this morning. The trees are dancing at dawning. A breeze is lifting my spirit. A voice is coming, I hear. Soft but hard, up to the sky. The dance I'm dancing, I'm learning. The fire of giving is burning. The need of loving is flowing along the river of knowing where to go. Feel the glow. In my brother's eyes, erasing all those lies. The world is thrown in our face. I was so out of place. Now I found a space. The words I'm sighing are My heart is quietly humming. The love of living is seeing. A peace